New videos every day.
Okay, so I'm John Breeding. It's Monday, April 19th, 2009, and I want to do a talk on the power of the situation, to borrow a term from Philip Zimbardo, who's one of the more well-known and respected researchers in the history of psychology out of Stanford University. So this is a consideration of the basic issue of psychology, which is about the individual personality and character versus social considerations, or so-called social psychology, which is about the power of the situation or a structure. I've learned a lot about this from Philip Zimbardo. I've also learned a lot about from Dr. Edward Young here in Austin. It's his idea that psychology, he figured out, was like the cult of the individual, is a phrase he used, And he figured out that structure was so much more powerful than personality and character in determining behavior, as hard as that is for people to accept. The best way to encourage positive behavior is to create a positive structure. The best way to encourage atrocious behavior is to create an atrocious structure. Ed demonstrated this in various settings, from psychiatric hospitals to prisons to juvenile justice systems, etc., consistently finding that you could take the people who are considered the baddest actors in the world, you change the structure of the situation that they're in, and you start eliciting prosocial behavior. So let's talk about this. One thing that's taught by the social psychologists is this idea of the fundamental attribution error. Crucial concept in psychology, fundamental attribution error. And attribution, of course, is just how you explain something. I attribute your bad behavior to the devils inside you, or I attribute your bad behavior to you're just immoral and wicked, or I attribute your bad behavior to your greedy character, right? Or on the other hand, I attribute your behavior to the power of the situation, to the structure that corrupted you or corrupted society in such a way that you had to steal to feed yourself, or that you had to steal to get a medicine to keep your grandmother alive or something because the society didn't provide it. Whatever. Power of the situation. That fundamental attribution error is the fact that we tend to attribute people's behavior to their character and personality, even when what may be more important is the power of the situation or the structure. We especially intend to attribute other people's bad behavior to their character and personality, whereas our own we tend to explain according to mitigating circumstances. Fundamental attribution error. So, two of the most famous experiments in the history of psychology, and most impactful as far as their interface with the world, one is the famous experiments by Stanley Milgram on obedience. We set up the shock device and supposedly to teach learners how to remember words by punishing them if they made a mistake by shocking them. Really, he was exploring whether they would obey the authority, the experimenter, and keep shocking people even though it was clearly distressing and painful and possibly very risky to the person receiving the shock. They found that most people, everybody obeyed up to a point, and 2/3 of the people went all the way to doing extreme, potentially dangerous, deadly shock, just because the authority would say the experiment must continue, and like that. Famous experiments on obedience. He was doing this to explore, this was post-World War II, did Germany happen just because they're all Nazis and the German character was defective and flawed, Or would other people do this like young Americans? The answer was that, yes, young Americans did this too, and it was called the experiment that shocked the world. Power of the situation, the power of conformity to authority. Zimbardo's famous experiment, prison experiment in the basement of Stanford, set up a mock prison with assigned people randomly to be guards or prisoners. Had to call the experiment off after 6 days because the guards started being so sadistic and the prisoners were getting all stressed and troubled. This was a relatively benign situation, a mock prison, but it elicited this behavior. Later on, Zimbardo became a consultant to some of the people defending themselves in the Abu Ghraib scandal, where all the pictures came out and the U.S. soldiers were torturing prisoners in Iraq. He came up as a consultant for the defense of a few of these lower-level people that were prosecuted, saying that we have to look at the power of the situation, the power of the structure. That I saw the same basic behavior patterns in my little prison in Stanford that we're seeing in this military prison in Iraq. The power of the situation. The military wanted to say that these were just bad apples. And Zimbardo's statement, of course, is no, they're good apples in a bad barrel. The barrel turns good apples bad. It's the power of the situation, the power of the structure. These were not sadistic personalities in general. They were just regular soldiers who were in an atrocity-producing situation. Of course, as we know now, it went all the way up the chain of command. A lot of the higher-level authorities in the U.S. government are now being indicted in Spain for their actions. Just yesterday, or just Friday, I guess, Obama released a bunch of these torture memos and stuff and more information that showed the extent at which this torture was going on. He refuses so far to hold accountable the people who did this and the authorities who authorized it. Transparency is good, but accountability is even better. The government and the military's position has always been to prosecute a few low levels when they're busted to such a great extent that they have to, but to let off the higher authorities and even promote them. All the way up to, of course, the vice president and presidential administration at the time. They created an atrocity-producing situation where you say, take off the gloves, this is the evil, we've got to go after this information, anything goes, torture's authorized, all the way down the line, and then put them in these untenable situations, these young guys in these prisons with these orders to get information and soften these guys up. The authorities either looking the other way or sanctioning it. And you have regular people ending up killing people. So murder after murder of these guys in detainment and torture. It's not that these soldiers were evil, sadistic people. Sure, they were conditioned to obey authority, but most people are. Put them in a benign situation, eliciting positive pro-social behavior, and you get that dynamic. Just like Ed Young found, like in the juvenile justice facility at Harris County Youth Village in Houston. It's called Stars and Stripes. You create a structure, and you have the worst juvenile delinquents starting to come forward in a positive way. You create student government. You create trained resident mediators. You create local support teams of adults taking an interest in each person. You create pro-social job training and opportunities. And what happens? You end up with positive growth and development and pro-social behavior, as opposed to the boot camps where things just get worse. The power of the situation. Of course, it's relevant for psychiatry and psychology, where instead of individual psychopathology, you look at the structures. I've always said that one of the big problems with biological psychiatry is that once you label a person as psychopathological and defective biological genetically, that explains the problem. You put blinders on and stop looking at issues of social and economic justice. You stop looking at the structure. You stop taking responsibility for the situation, the structure that would nurture and elicit. The idea is when you get quote-unquote bad behavior, the question to ask is, how is this system or structure designed in a way that elicits this behavior? How do I design a structure that elicits bad behavior? What would I do? How do I design a structure that elicits positive behavior? What would I do? It's not that hard once you start thinking in these terms. How do I design a structure to bring forward the best and the good in people? Well, one, you align it with human nature in the sense that people love closeness and affection. They love validation. They love responsibility. They love self-determination. Instead of setting goals for other people and telling them what to do, you elicit their own goals and support them in figuring out how to do that. Things like that. Get good communication flows going. Things like that. The power of the situation. It's humbling to think that we are so vulnerable to conditioning, and that most of us have not developed the strength of character to be like Gandhi or Mandela or somebody who's going to hold true to themselves even if they're jailed. But there's people like that. That's a heroic personality. That's a heroic character. We need to keep trying to develop that. People are responsible for their behavior, but especially with young people, we need to create structures and take responsibility for those and quit blaming and psychopathologizing people. Remember the fundamental attribution error. Next time you want to just go blaming somebody, look at the structure and see what can be done to create a system that is more likely to bring forward positive development and personal responsibility and maturity like that. That's it for today. This applies to you, your friends, everybody. There's a great documentary that won the Academy Award a year ago called The Taxi Driver. It's about a guy who was murdered by the U.S. military in Afghanistan. But that video shows totally what I'm talking about in the sense of trying to explain things by the personality and character and prosecuting a few low-level soldiers, but showing this whole structure that creates an atrocity-producing situation. It brings to life Zimbardo's experiment and everything else big time. So if you want to see this brought into the real world, it's called The Taxi Driver.
If you liked this video, we have hundreds of more alternative videos ranging from sexual health to psychology to mind control. So if you liked it, go ahead and click on me to enter the Psychetruth channel.